And just to give you some background on Steve, so Steve spent 10 years in the Royal Navy as a Royal Navy commander, and he was a soldier and a sailor, which is very unusual. And then Steve also went on to spend 20 years in the fire service, which is amazing. And thank you, as they say in America, thank you for your service. And then in 2020, Sue and Steve are one of the co-founders, as we all know, of one of the very first Rebels on Roundabouts in Stockport. And as well as one of the main supporters with Nick and Kev last year and Nick this year of the Weekend Truth Festival. So it's a great honour to welcome Steve for his talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. I'm normally behind the camera, not in front of the camera, so it's a little bit strange for me, this. Just to correct Dolores slightly, I wasn't a Royal Navy commander. I was a Royal Navy commando. It's kind of like the Royal Marines, but slightly different. All right. Okay, can I just have a quick show of hands before we start? Has anybody in here followed my latest gender critical campaign on social media?
Edge of the Matrix.
Yeah, it's on the YouTube channel Edge of the Matrix. It's on Edge of the Matrix. And I was told to go on TikTok because that's where all the kids are at as well. So I went on there, and my God, it's blown up. You know, a couple of the videos have had like almost 3 million views. So it's really getting this message out there. Okay, for those of you that haven't seen it, and that's probably the majority of you in here now, I'm going to show you what it looks like a little bit. So 1 second. Yeah, so what I do is I go to towns and cities up and down the country looking a little bit stupid. Okay, so I've got these billboards. Normally, traditionally, there'd be a guy saying, "The end of the world is nigh." Yes. Now, I've got 2 statements on these boards, but I've got other boards which I haven't actually taken out on the streets yet. Now, I think these are pretty, they're not very controversial statements in my eyes, but to some, and they do live amongst us, you know, it just elicits quite an emotional response for them. And also as well, if you look at the colours, does anybody recognise what these colours represent? Yes. Show of hands.
The pedo colours.
Well, yeah, so together like this, it's the transgender flag. Okay, but what you'll notice is you've got like a baby blue and a baby pink. Okay, now why they've chosen those colours, I don't really know. But whether it's to attract children towards this ideology, I'm not sure. So I'll leave you to think about that. Right, let me just take these off because it's pretty difficult doing this. Okay, so it's a gender critical campaign that I'm doing. So I just want a show of hands and I want everyone to participate in this. I want to know if you know the difference between sex and gender. Okay? Right, so let me ask one question first. Right, who thinks sex and gender are the same thing? Just one. So show of hand, 2. And the thing is, if you think they're different, you're going to have to define the difference. So if you can't define the difference, I want you to put your hand up and think that they're the same thing. So who thinks that they're the same thing? Okay, a few more hands there, probably half a dozen. Who thinks sex and gender are different? Is there anybody that just doesn't know? Quite a few of you. Yeah, right, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, when I'm out on the streets, one of the main questions that I get answered is, but why do you care? Can everybody see that screen from here? Okay, you can see there's quite a few people in there, and there's me with my billboards, and it says, There's no such thing as a transgender child on that billboard. And then you've got this this lovely, fiery, red-haired young woman. Long red hair. She's got a denim jacket on, a lovely blue polka dot dress, and a bag casually strung over her shoulder. Can anybody see what she's got in her right hand? Her left hand is holding me, or trying to grab my boards, and there's something in the right hand. Can anybody see that? Is it too small? So that's a pair of scissors. Okay, and that's in Bold Street in Liverpool. Okay, so I was there chatting to members of the public, because what I do is I go out on the streets and have conversations with people. It's all about conversations and raising awareness of this gender ideology. This ideology, because it sounds so crazy, it has just slipped in under the radar of the general public. If it wasn't quite as crazy, we might have noticed it a little bit. But when people hear about it, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about it in the slides to come, they think, oh, don't be daft, don't be stupid. You know, that's not right. It can't happen. Believe me, I've been out on the streets, up and down the country, and something has happened and something has gripped our society, okay, and it's got into the institutions. I make reference to the long march through the institutions, and it's a political strategy to fundamentally change society without having a revolution, without spilling blood. And what's happened is this ideology has got into the universities initially, and the people from the universities are now from Generation Z, okay, and maybe some millennials as well, the millennial generation, and they are now working as managers or in the HR departments of our institutions, including the police force, including the fire service, which I was in for 20 years, including your councils and all other large corporations. And they've written these policies, these self-identification policies, where you can identify as whichever gender, and we're going to talk about the difference between gender and sex. You can identify as whichever gender that you wish, and that automatically gives you access to the spaces of the chosen gender, of your chosen gender. Can anybody see any problems with that? Yeah. They're also teaching it to kids at school. Has anybody here got kids in primary schools or secondary schools? Yeah, quite a few of you. Or you've got grandkids in primary schools and secondary schools. I would say demand from your school's head teacher to know what they're teaching your children. Okay, so can anybody give me a lot of people thought they knew the difference of sex and gender. Can they tell me or give a definition of what gender is? A choice. So basically, sex, this is what they tell us. I don't like to use this term gender because they're conflating sex and gender, and you'll see how they're doing that a little bit later. But basically, sex is rooted in biology, in nature, and now gender is a social construct. It's something that has been made up. So, one of the main academics, a proponent of gender, who's written probably more on gender than any other person, is a lady called Judith Butler. WTF is Judith Butler. Who the is Judith Butler? Okay. In this article here, which was in The Guardian, it says, we need to rethink the category of woman. Is there any women in here that thinks your category needs to be rethought?
No, thank you.
Okay. Judith should be able to explain what gender is. If she's, in fact, let's first see what some of her supporters say about Judith Butler. Okay, one of the most influential and intellectual figures of our time. The next one, a rare international celebrity academic. And note that is in Teen Vogue magazine. Okay, so they're speaking to the teenagers about Judith Butler. She does have her critics as well. She has many critics, I'm one of them. The she-devil, or rather the they-devil. I mean, I'm not a fan of The Guardian, but this is a Guardian article calling her the she-devil. And the they-devil, that's a play on the pronouns, and we'll get onto the pronouns in a bit, because that's how it starts with the social transition. The high priestess of gender ideology. That's meant as a pejorative as well, that's not meant to bigger up. Postmodern assault on the truth. This is all about postmodernism, and we will touch on that. Does anybody know what postmodernism is? It's basically trying to deconstruct everything that we know and turn society into chaos. That's a very broad definition, but we can narrow that down in a bit. And even the Vatican has made a statement about this, at least about gender ideology, and they say it threatens human dignity and the family. And I can tell you now, it really does. Not only threatens families, it tears families apart. And I've spoken to people whose families have been ripped apart of this. I've spoken to mothers who's been desperate because their daughters have been captured by this gender ideology cult. And I've seen pictures of where they've been cutting themselves and mutilating their bodies, and it's horrific what this has done. Okay, so Judith Butler, she's the main academic on this, and she should be able to clearly define what sex or gender is, or is she trying to conflate the two of them? So she's written more about it than everybody else, so let's see what she has to say. Okay, gender is not to culture as sex is to nature. Gender is also the discursive stroke cultural means by which sexed nature or unnatural sex is produced and established as pre-discursive, prior to culture, a politically neutral surface on which culture acts. Everyone got that? Is that quite clear? We all now know the difference between gender and sex, or what gender is. You got that? That was from her book, Gender Troubles. I'll do another quote from that book. It was Gender Troubles and Feminism and Subversion of Identity. So let's see if she can make it a little bit clearer. The immutable character of sex is contested. Is the immutable character of sex contested? Perhaps this construct, called sex, is as culturally constructed as gender. Remember we said gender was a social construct and sex is rooted in biology that can't be changed. She's conflating the two here. Indeed, perhaps it was already gender. So she's trying to say sex and gender is the same thing though. Same thing now, although she used to say basically that gender is something that we perform, therefore we are. Now she's conflating the two. Let's try one more time from a different book. What we call sex is already gender, with the consequence that the distinction between sex and gender turns out to be no distinction at all. So what you are naturally, sex, and what you perform, gender, is the same thing. Now she's saying it there. When I'm out on the streets, I'm told by these trans rights activists and these gender ideologues that they're two different things, but then they conflate the two to make them the same. And this has even got into government legislation as well, which is what we're going to come to. And this is part of the root of where we had how we got here. Okay, so there's Judith Butler, and as you can see, she's trying to look a little bit gender neutral in the way she presents herself as well. as you can see, the short hair there. But you listen to her speak, and she speaks with such conviction. And young adults going to university with all these ideas, they're fed Judith Butler. She speaks with authority. She's written all these books, and they believe her. Okay, so can we clear it up a little bit? I love internet memes because sometimes they don't have to use many words and they get straight to the heart. You completely understand what it means straight away. So let's have a look. Sexism equals women should do the dishes. Equality means or equals men or women can do the dishes. And gender or gender ideology says whoever is doing the dishes is the woman.
Well done.
So that could be anything. Whoever wears the dress is the woman. Okay. A trans woman is a woman. Okay. Let me talk about the language that these gender ideologues use. Okay. Who's heard that saying, a trans woman is a woman? Okay. We're going to get to that. That's the rallying cry of these gender ideologues. They'll hold the flags up, they'll have a flag like this, and it'll say, trans women are women. Well, why do you need the prefix trans? Women are women. What they also do is they will say to all you women in this room, you're a cis woman. Have you heard that phrase? Yeah. You've heard that phrase, cis woman? Yeah. I kind of like reject that term, but they need an opposite, because if you haven't got that category woman, okay, and they're introducing trans woman, there's got to be an opposite. What I would say to you is they flip the language on its head, and it can be confusing for people that haven't spent any time researching this topic. Every time they use the word trans, substitute that word for pretend. Okay? So a trans woman is a pretend woman. It is a man who is identifying himself as a woman. On the flip side of that, a trans man is a pretend man. It is a woman, a female, pretending to be a man. And do you know what? There are many, many more of those amongst us than you would realise. And because they're fed synthetic hormones, they grow beards, they grow hairy legs. The voice, you can normally tell with the voice because it's a little bit squeaky and croaky. It doesn't sound feminine, but it doesn't quite sound masculine as well. But they use this term pass. They pass as the opposite sex or gender, but they pass quite well. Okay, so let's go back to where this term gender actually came from. Look into those eyes. Don't see Jimmy Savile. Has anybody heard of John Money? Yes. A few. Okay, so John Money, all this gender ideology can almost be traced back to John Money. Now, there've always been people who like to identify as the opposite sex. We've seen that, through millennia. It has happened, but there are very, very rare occasions. Now, all this ideology can be traced back to John Money. Okay, and John Money had a theory. Okay, was being a man or a woman was down to socialization, not biology. Okay, and he coined the term gender identity back in 1957. So let's talk about who John Money was. He was born, I can't remember the exact year, he's in the 1920s in New Zealand. He emigrated to America and he studied at Harvard. And then he went to practice in Johns Hopkins University, and there was University Hospital. We all know about Johns Hopkins University. It was in Baltimore. It was in Baltimore. Okay, so he had this theory that if you were to take a child prior to the age of 2.5 to 3 years old and socialise that child, so you could take a boy, socialise him as a girl, and he would then become a woman. That was his big theory. He wanted to test that out. A little bit about his history. When he was a young boy, his dad was not a very nice man. He used to constantly beat up John's mother. He used to whip John. He used to whip him, and John Money saw that as this toxic masculinity. Okay, and he hated everything that it was to be a man. And to give you an idea of what's happening in John Money's mind, this is a quote from him. "I suffered from the guilt of being male. I wore the mark of men's vile sexuality. I wondered if the world might be a better place for women if not only farm animals but human males were gelded at birth." So what he's saying, gelded means castrated, okay? So he wore the mark of men's vile sexuality. To John Money, that was the penis, and he thinks or thought that men should be castrated at birth to get rid of that toxic masculinity. So that's what's going on in his mind. Now, John Money was a depraved human being. He went on to be a psychologist and also what's called a sexologist, and he used to lecture students on sex in Johns Hopkins University and topics that he used to cover, and he made slides and showed videos to his students of such things as bestiality, urine drinking, feces eating, incest, group sex. He was this vile human being but was fascinated with sex. Has anybody heard of this book? The DSM-5. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manuals of Mental Disorders. Okay, that's like the psychiatrist's Bible. Okay, and I bought a copy of it. I was really interested to see what was inside this book. So John Money had a lot to do with the reshaping of certain characteristics within this book. So within the book, there used to be certain, well, they're listed now as paraphilic disorders, okay, but they used to be listed as perversions. I just want to speak of you. Have we got any children in the room? Okay, I won't be too explicit. Okay, the first one, voyeuristic disorder. Okay, recurrent or intense sexual arousal from observing an unsuspecting person who is naked. That's voyeurism. Exhibitionist disorder. Recurrent and intense sexual arousal from exposure of one's genitals. So they're your flashers, you know, the ones that jump out of the bush, flash and run off. Okay, I think the modern day version of that will be sending dick pics on dating sites. I've never heard of this one before. Frotteuristic disorder. Has anybody heard of frotteuristic disorder? Okay, recurrent or intense sexual arousal from touching or rubbing against non-consenting persons. Okay, sexual masochism disorder. Recurrent or intense sexual arousal from the act of being humiliated, bound, or otherwise made to suffer, as manifested by fantasies and urges. On the opposite end of the scale, sexual sadism disorder. Recurrent and intense sexual arousal from physical or psychological suffering of another person. There are some. They do live amongst us, these people. Okay, relevance to John Money. Paedophilic disorder. I won't go into what that is, these children here. Okay, fetishistic disorder. This one's relevant. Recurrent and intense sexual arousal from either the use of non-living objects or highly specific focus on non-genital body parts. Sorry, the more relevant one that I wanted to speak of was transvestic disorder. Okay, recurrent and intense sexual arousal from cross-dressing as manifested by fetishes and urges. Okay, and it goes on to specify two different ones. With fetishism, if sexually aroused by fabrics, materials or garments, and here's the one that I want you to remember, autogynephilia. If sexually aroused by thoughts or images of oneself as a female. Okay. So up until the DSM-5, they were called perversions. Now, John Money lobbied the American Psychiatric Association to change the name perversion to a paraphilia because it sounded better. It didn't sound as bad. Now, why would he himself want to change the name of perversion to a paraphilia? We'll find out. Okay, so there's John Money. He had this theory that a boy could be brought up as a girl and then he would go on to live as a woman. But he needed a case study to prove that. Okay, enter the Riemer family. Okay, if you can see that picture, there's only the mother and the two twins there. There is a father involved, he's just not on this picture. Janet and John Riemer. They had twins, they were identical twins, and they were called Brian and Bruce. Now, they had not a disorder, they had an issue with urinating, and the doctors said to the parents, you might be better circumcising the young boys and that will get rid of this disorder or this issue with them urinating. It makes me squirm a little bit. Does any man here squirm a little bit when you talk about circumcision? Yeah. So what they did, they took the doctor's advice because Janet and John Riemer, they were a young couple, 20 and 21, I believe. Blue-collar family, working-class family from Winnipeg in Canada. They took the doctor's advice and they went to have the foreskins of the twins removed. So Bruce was first up, and instead of using a scalpel, they used something called an electrocauterization needle, okay, which burns the skin away. The surgery went horribly wrong and it burned young Bruce's penis beyond recognition and beyond function. So of course, they didn't put Brian through that, okay? And the family were then desperate. They did not know what to do. They were 22 months old. Then they saw on TV this charismatic doctor called John Money, and they thought it was the answer to their dreams for poor young Bruce, because John Money said, if you bring up a child, a young boy as a girl, they will go on to live a happy life as a woman. So they flew from Canada to Johns Hopkins University. I think it was a university hospital. Anyway, they went to see John Money. And it wasn't the answer to the dreams of the Riemer family, it was the answer to John Money's dreams, because he had the perfect case study to prove his theory. Because not only did they have this young boy whose genitals had been burnt beyond recognition, they also had an identical twin brother who was the control group. So he said to the parents, you must never ever tell young Bruce that he was once a boy. Socialise him and bring him up as a girl, and you will have a happy, healthy daughter who will grow up to be a happy, healthy woman. And you must come back and see me every year so I can report and note the progress. And you must believe it yourself. Okay, for it to work, you must believe it. Forget any idea of what it was that you had a young son. So they fully castrated him. They removed his testicles, and then they socialised him, if you can see there, as a girl. So you've got Brian and Bruce, and they renamed Bruce Brenda, and as you can see there, Brenda's got long hair. I'll still refer to Brenda as a he. I always use sex-based pronouns. Whenever you meet these ideologues and they say, my pronouns are he, him, okay, when it's obviously a woman, you will be like, you're using the correct pronouns by using those that are associated with your biological sex. Okay, so there we have Brenda Reamer looking happy. And there's the father, there's John, and if you look at that picture, if you can see it, Brian looks quite happy, but Brenda doesn't look happy. I'm not really good with ages of kids, but I would probably imagine that, is that about 10 years old? Would you say that? I would say that Brenda isn't looking happy because Brenda is a young boy being brought up as a young girl. Now, they used to take the kids to see John Money once a year, and he used to make his notes. He used to see the kids on their own. He used to take them on their own and do this psychiatric analysis of the two boys together. John Money reported it as a resounding success. When they were 6 years old, there was a conference. It was a big psychiatric conference in Washington, D.C., and John Money announced to the world that it was a resounding success. We've socialised a young boy as a girl, and she lives a happy life. If you want to read and learn any more about it, here's my book. I've produced it. It's just been released today, and you can all buy it and read it. The truth was that young Brenda never accepted being a girl. Okay? She was terribly bullied. The children used to call him Cave Woman. He used to try and urinate standing up, and he never accepted it. But John Money told the world and told all the psychiatrists, psychologists, that it was a resounding success, and they all believed you could then socialise a child as the opposite sex and they would grow up to live happy lives. Age 14, the kids were terribly unhappy. They never wanted to go back to the sessions with John Money. It turned out that he sexually abused the two boys during those sessions. He used to make them mimic and perform sex acts on each other. He publicly endorsed incest and paedophilia. So God knows what went on, but we do know that those boys did not want to go back to see John Money, and the parents revealed to young Brenda, in fact, that he was a boy. As soon as he realised, he rejected this female identity that was imposed on him, and he took on the name David. Okay, and that was because he saw himself as David fighting this big battle against Goliath. And this is David Reamer on the Oprah Winfrey Show, I think in the year 2000, telling his whole story, because when he found out that, because the Reamers was never mentioned in John Money's books or by name. Their identity was never revealed. I think he used the name John and Jane. So when David Reimer realised that the whole psychiatric world believed the story, he came out and told the story and revealed everything that I'm talking to you about today. The kids were terribly, the two brothers were terribly disturbed from this childhood trauma. Brian became a drug addict and overdosed, I think in his mid-30s. Yeah, I think he was 36. Yeah, he would have been. Because David, he actually went on to get married. He got married, he adopted 3 kids and was living a happy life. The marriage didn't go too well. In this interview with Oprah Winfrey, he was saying, what will it take for the world to understand what happens? Do I have to go and put a gun to my head for people to understand what this man John Money did to us? 2 years after his brother overdosed, David Reimer got into his car, drove to the car park of the local grocery store with a sawn-off shotgun, put it to his head and blew his head off. So that was the legacy of John Money. His idea that you could socialise a child, okay, it was basically nurture over nature. This experiment proved nature over nurture. Okay, so let's move on from that traumatic story and talk about the sex binary. Sex is a binary. Okay, it's not on a spectrum, contrary to what the gender ideologues will tell you. Okay, but just look at the headline there. I wanted to leave this in on this slide. The gender binary model, see the conflation between sex and gender? The gender binary model, without exaggeration, is a white supremacist propaganda. Yeah. I was out on the streets of Manchester and this man come up to me when I had my boards on and he screamed at me, white-haired man, "How dare you? Your white male privilege." This was another white man as well, you know, saying I was white male privilege, hating on a minority group. Okay, let me tell you or explain to you in the simplest terms that I can how sex is determined. Okay, your sex is determined by your reproductive strategy, whether that works or not. Your body is either designed to produce eggs or to produce sperm. Okay, they call the technical term for that, the biological term is gametes. That was a new word for me when I started looking into this. So they say large gametes, which are your eggs, which females produce, and they say small motile gametes, which is sperm, which males produce. So when I'm out on the streets, I get asked this question, but what about intersex? Is everybody aware of the term intersex? So intersex is like, it's a rare genetic condition. It's like, it's an older term, intersex. It's like an umbrella term for what we now call disorders of sexual development. Or you can be a bit kinder, it's sometimes called difference of sexual development. Because to be born with one of these conditions, you've been dealt a really shit hand of cards in life if you were born intersex. Now there's about 40 different types of these intersex disorders. I'm going to talk a little bit about those. They're very rare, by the way. There's many different approximations as to how rare, but the most accurate one that I can find is it's 0.02% of the population. So that's 99.98% of us are born without fully male or fully female. So here's 4 of them that I've listed. Turner syndrome, so it's all about chromosomes, okay? XX chromosomes for a woman, XY chromosomes for a man, and we have 23 pairs of those chromosomes which are in every single cell of our bodies. So if you were born with a disorder of sexual development, as I said, there's about 40 of them. Here's some more common ones. So Turner syndrome, 45X. Let me just say, even if you're born with an intersex condition, every single one of those are still either male or female. It's how your body's reproductive system was designed. Okay, so 45X, female. You can see that there's a missing chromosome there. Okay, so normally there's 46, there's one missing, and it's the X chromosome. Women with that condition, they have certain features, normally a little bit smaller, broader shoulders, webbed neck, maybe some learning difficulties, but their reproductive system is all female. Klinefelter syndrome, you can see there's an extra chromosome there, XXY. Okay, so these are males that are born with the X and Y chromosome, but one extra chromosome. That's why it's 47, not 46. It usually manifests itself in reduced testosterone. Maybe males will get gynecomastia. That's like they'll start forming man boobs or breasts, and smaller testicles, smaller testes. Androgen insensitivity syndrome, 46XY. That sounds normal. Basically, the androgen, how do I explain this? The cell's ability to absorb testosterone, okay, there's an insensitivity to that. So what happens is, the person will be born with female features, maybe even female genitalia, but they have testes inside the stomach. They don't have functioning female internal anatomy to produce eggs. They have internal testes, okay, which still produce testosterone. It's just the body's ability to absorb that hasn't worked, and that's why they look more female than male. Must be 15 minutes. Oh my God, I've waffled on too long. I'm going to flick through all these because I want to take some questions as well. Okay, and then 5-alpha reductase deficiency. Okay, do you recognise those 2 people? Got to move really quick here. Okay, the one on the left is Caster Semenya. Okay, South African runner, London 2012 Olympics. The one on the right is Emain Khalif, Algerian boxer, 2024 Paris Olympics, all right? I must say, none of these 2 men, because they are men, they've got 5-alpha reductase syndrome, none of those identify as transgender. However, what happens in urethra, so in the womb, okay, a baby, a male, will get a rush of something called dihydrotestosterone, which forms the male genitalia. It doesn't happen in people with this condition. So they're born and they appear female. They've got ambiguous genitalia, but they appear female. They normally have, again, testes, which are up inside the stomach. At usually about 12 years old, 13, they get the rush of testosterone for puberty, and they then develop, you know, male characteristics. That's what happened with these 2 people, but a lot of cases, they literally go on, they change, instead of being a called female, at 12 or 13, they get this testosterone, they realise they're male, okay, and then they live life as a male. These 2 didn't, went on into the Olympics. The result of that, Caster Semenya smashing everybody in the 800 metres. She won silver at the London 2012 Olympics. The winner was a Russian lady, but she got disqualified because she was taking testosterone injections, so they gave it to a man instead, who came second, and the man got the gold. And there you go, you've got the Italian boxer there crying because she's been beat up by a man in the ring. Okay, The Gender Recognition Act 2004. This is legislation that our government has passed, okay? The Gender Recognition Act created the mechanism for people to be able to change their legal sex. Can you see the conflation? From gender to sex. So you can perform the social roles of the opposite gender, and then you can legally change your sex on your birth certificate, on your driving license. And then all these men saying, oh, now I'm a lady, okay? So then it gives them access into female spaces. And that was what the Supreme Court judgment was about. It said that the term woman meant biological sex. Okay, so it doesn't mean someone with a gender recognition certificate. So only females, true females, can go into female spaces. Trans rights are human rights. That's what they say. They want privileges. Men want privileges to go into women's changing rooms and women's toilets and women's sports. So what could possibly go wrong? As well, women's spaces, women's prisons. This guy here, he's called Karen White. His original name was Stephen Wood. Convicted rapist, sex offender. So as soon as he was convicted, he identified as a woman and got put in a women's prison. In the women's prison, he sexually assaulted two women, and the court transcript had to use his preferred pronouns. She assaulted him with her penis. Okay, that guy there is Adam Graham. Again, he was a child sex offender, a rapist, double rapist. He identified as Isla Bryson and was put in Scotland's only women prison under Nicola Sturgeon. There was a public outcry and got him moved into a male prison. That's a man beating up a woman in a mixed martial arts ring in a cage. His name is Boyd Burton. He was in the United States Navy. He left, fair play to him, he had all the surgery, everything locked off, grew some breasts, and then went into mixed martial arts, but did not tell his opponents it was a man. That's him beating up a woman. Not the one I'm going to talk about now. He beat up a woman called Tamika Brents. He kneed her in the face, broke the orbital bone in her skull. This degenerated human being was called Jonathan Yaniv, called himself Jessica Yaniv. In Canada, he went around beauty parlours wanting a Brazilian wax. And a lot of these women worked at home. There was a woman working from home, refused him service, and Jonathan Yaniv, called himself Jessica, took this woman to court because they wouldn't wax his hairy Canadian balls, basically, but he failed. Okay, this is Bruce Jenner, then went on to be called Caitlyn Jenner. 1976 Olympic decathlon. You couldn't get more masculine man than Bruce Jenner. He was an autogynephile. Remember we talked about autogynephilia before? Okay, he has a sexual fetish of imagining himself as a woman. When his family were out, he sneaked into his daughter's bedroom and started wearing her knickers. His daughter had a computer with a webcam on it, which was live streaming, and he was captured on the live screen. On the live stream, he then said, "Oh well, I'm a lady. You know, I've always wanted to be a lady." He grew a pair of tits, put a dress on. He was Vanity Fair and Glamour magazine Woman of the Year 2015. During this period, the numbers of young people identifying with gender dysphoria went through the roof. So what is gender dysphoria? This early onset gender dysphoria, that is when young children are showing signs of identifying as the opposite sex. We had a young boy at school called David, and he used to want to play with the girls and play with dolls. Didn't want to play football with us. He grew up to be gay. Okay, and that's generally what happened. Puberty is the cure for gender dysphoria. Normally they'll grow up to be gay, or they'll just lose all this idea of being the opposite sex. Late onset gender dysphoria, that's your middle-aged men all of a sudden identifying as women. okay? And the Gender Recognition Act, what we talked about, will allow them to do that. Rapid onset gender dysphoria. This is this new category of young people, predominantly teenage girls, but not exclusive to those, all of a sudden hitting puberty and identifying as the opposite gender. Just think of these social contagions which we've had in the past, like anorexia, bulimia, cutting, something like that. Usually, these young people have suffered some kind of trauma and distress in their life, and then they're trying to mask that by being something that they're not. Particularly young women who've been sexually abused do not want the attention from men, because they're starting to develop these secondary sex characteristics. So what happens then? 5 minutes, oh my God. So what they do then is want to identify as a male so that they will not get this attention from men. Normally they've been sexually abused. Okay, the Tavistock Clinic. This was a clinic where they were taking these young boys and girls with gender dysphoria to the clinic, and they were in many cases being affirmed in their delusion that they are the opposite gender. And what that led to is social transition, using pronouns, dressing as the opposite sex. Then they give them puberty blockers. Really, they're hormone blockers. What that is, it stimulates the pituitary gland. They get a rush of the hormone, and then it stops it producing it. So boys, no more testosterone. Girls, no more estrogen. Then they gave them opposite sex hormones, which, so a girl would be given testosterone, start growing a beard. A boy would be given estrogen, starts growing breasts. Then in more extreme cases, they will go on to go under the scalpel. Double mastectomies for young girls, vaginoplasties for young boys, castrate them, invert the penis, create a fake vagina, which has to be constantly dilated for the rest of the life. Okay, the Tavistock Clinic was closed, okay, in London. They were sued by a girl called Kira Bell, who they transitioned to be a boy. They're normally suffering some kind of distress, remember, but they're told the answer to that is to identify as the opposite sex. That's a great book, Time to Think by Hannah Barnes. You can see the graph there of the rise in people being taken to the gender clinic, the Tavistock Clinic. There is a dip at the end, but that was 2020, 2021. That's during the COVID period. There was a 4,000% increase of people identifying as the opposite gender over a 10-year period. So yeah, we've talked about that. Puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones and surgery. That's Kira Bell, okay. Age 16, given puberty blockers. Age 17, cross-sex hormones. Double mastectomy, age 20. Richie Herron just doesn't affect kids. Richie Herron, 27, suffering, or told he was suffering from gender dysphoria. He was a gay man that was homophobic. He could see himself sleeping with another man if he identified as a woman, but not as a man, as a woman. Age 26, cross-sex hormones. Age 30, castration, and immediately regretted it, and he's detransitioned. Chloe Cole, age 12, socially transitioned. Age 13, puberty blockers, and then onto cross-sex hormones. Age 15, double mastectomy, both breasts removed. Clementine Breen, she was the youngest girl, aged, I believe, 13 or 14, double mastectomy. I think age 12, puberty blockers. Age 13, testosterone. Age 14, both breasts removed. She is now suing I think it's Joanna Olsen Kennedy, who was the clinician that affirmed her. I don't know if Olsen Kennedy did the operation, but she's suing California Children's Hospital. There is hope. If anybody has any young children within the family that are coming home from school saying, I want to be a boy, if it's a girl, and vice versa, or I'm non-binary, the resource to go to is GenSpect, okay, genspect.org. Check that out. You'll find all the statistics about that. They're having a conference in Albuquerque this year. Sue and I are going to go to that, and I'm going to speak to all the detransitioners, all the clinicians and all the experts that are there, okay, and I'm going to be bringing all those testimonies to my YouTube channel. Okay, but why do you care? Why, that's the question I asked at the beginning. Because this is a war on reality, a war on the truth, and a war on the freedom of speech, as well as all the harms to women and children that we showed before. Okay, there's me. That was in Liverpool, so I was covered in hot chili sauce by a trans rights activist and smacked him in the face twice for my troubles. That video is going to be released soon. I'm going to go to court soon in Liverpool over that. So that was the one from the beginning. I titled the video "Edward Scissor Trans." Do you like that? Okay, nearly done. So that was me being surrounded by Antifa. Okay, the so-called anti-fascists, that's on Brighton seafront, and you can see I'm covered in soup. I got covered in soup again there. Okay, this degenerate of an individual stalked me all the way down Brighton seafront. He's about 6'2", this guy, at least. Just look at him, he's got my signs, he stole my signs and ran off with them. So I'm running after him down Brighton seafront. I'm still covered in soup, as you can see from that. You can see how much taller he is than me there. I'm 5'5", right? This guy is 6'2", so he thought, you know, he's not going to be a problem to me. So I followed him, I did my best to stop him, I warned him, I said, this isn't a good idea, mate. He said, these are my signs now, and ran off. He fucked around and found out. That's him there on the floor with me on top of him, retrieving my signs, okay? I would encourage anybody to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's all I'll say. This is one of my prouder moments. I am leading a trans rights march through the streets of Manchester, okay, with my, there's no such thing as a transgender child, and the public loved that one. You can watch all these videos on my YouTube channel. So the channel there is Edge of the Matrix. Okay, it's growing in popularity now. I can influence 1,000 people on the street in one day when I go up and down the country. I put it on social media for two reasons. One, for my safety, because I'm always getting attacked and I want to prosecute these people, or it does put people off. But what it does, it gives me a wider audience. As I said, TikTok, we've had nearly 3 million views on the videos. I've had some closing in on 200,000 views on YouTube and on X as well. I bet we've not got time for questions, have we now? We do. Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Well done.
Yeah, sorry, just very, very quickly, because I know this is something Steve really wanted to get in, but do you want to just explain where the funding comes from, very, very briefly on this, and also, what's in it for Big Pharma?
Yeah, very good. I've tried to find accurate statistics, they're hard to come by, but one of them is for Big Pharma, every trans patient is worth about 1.5 million because of all the surgeries and a lifetime on cross-sex hormones and then other complications that bring. There are global organisations funding this. You won't be, you know, you could imagine that would be the case. Who's doing it? There are a couple of billionaire males who I would maybe suggest are autogynephiles because they now identify as women and they want to normalise their behaviour. You can look these up. One of them is called Jennifer Pritzker, and the other one, that's a Ukrainian immigrant to the United States, and another one is called Martin Rothblatt. Okay, they're two men who now identify as women. They're billionaires and they're funding gender studies in the universities. There's also the Ford Foundation is another one, and you won't be surprised to hear that George Soros's Open Society Foundation is funding them as well.
Who's funding you?
Who's funding me? I do it myself. Yeah. This is the thing, because this is a long march through the institutions, and they've gotten into the HR departments and managerial positions in big institutions. People are afraid to speak out. People can't speak about this because they're too afraid of losing their jobs. In these many cases, look at Maya Forstarter. She took her employer to court because they didn't renew a contract because they spoke out, because she spoke out about it. I don't have any paymasters now, so I can speak out. I don't care, and I haven't got a reputation, like all these celebrities. I don't care what people say about me. I went from being slightly left of centre and being a fire brigade union member for all my career to being a far right wing Nazi fascist bigot, white supremacist. Thank you, guys. Any more questions?
No, I'm going to say I think he's really a brave English man who wants to not be gaslit by society. And also, the applications of this is that people are psychologically, little boys and girls are disturbed. So what you're trying to do is to prevent harm. And also an added issue they have is you become infertile. The young boys and girls, so there is an assault on family, community and the country, and this is an assault. And just as an aside, I was on fighting against this on the diversity, equality, inclusion for 15 years in my university. In Ireland, they were going to hire 50 female-only, we'll say, professors in Ireland about 2015-16, and I was trying to stop it, which they weren't doing. So I said, if you don't stop it, I will identify in HR as a man, apply for one of the female-only professors as a man. If I don't get shortlisted, I will sue you as a man in the High Court as a precedence case and write an article in the newspapers. And then I said in HR, which one of you are going to put the ads in? Because 50 female-only professors discriminates against men, right? Do you get it?
Yeah.
And discrimination is a criminal offence, to discriminate. And then I also told them, because they're not very bright, if you do this, the university forevermore can say all roles are male only. Yeah? And of course, most of the diversity, equality, inclusion are women, and they were going, what? You know what I mean? If you can do what's good for the goose. And they basically stopped the campaign, because I was going to identify. Now that's about 10 years ago. So there is ways to do it, and fair play. So who has we got one question? Because it's a difficult subject to talk about, and in a way what Steve is doing is breaking the ice. You know what I mean? It's a very brave thing to do because you're intimidated and assaulted.
I think. Oh, there you go. We're around all weekend anyway, so if anybody has got questions and wants to ask Steve, then please do, because I am conscious of the fact that we're really
There is one quick question. There's a quick question there.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Steve, what's the most enjoyable interaction on the street that you've had?
What's the most enjoyable interaction?
I can't, in fact, I was going to say I can't pinpoint one, but I can. What I will say is that what I didn't realise when I set out to do this was the amount of great conversations that I would have with the general public. We'd all been isolated from each other for quite a few years during the COVID era, but I was getting out there on the streets, talking to everyday people and listening to their stories. I think just recently, just a few weeks ago in Manchester, I was approached by an alternative looking person, and I thought, oh, here we go again, and he's walking towards me with focus like that. I'm thinking, oh God, I'm going to get it again, because they spit so much abuse at me, so much vitriol. The language is really vicious. This is the Be Kind Brigade. They're only kind if you agree with their ideology. I thought, right, I'm going to get it here. And then as he approached me, because he looked a little bit androgynous, not male or female like, and I realised it was a male, those natural instincts, and he said, thank you so much for what you do. And I thought, oh right, here we go. He said, I'm a detransitioner. Okay, I was caught in this cult, and I once thought that I was a female, but it was because of all the trauma that I'd suffered in my life. But thank you so much for standing up for what we're doing. And I said, can you tell us a story? And he said, not now, but if I see you again. I went, right, give me your phone number, I want to speak to you. So I've been in contact with Eli. Okay, you won't mind me mentioning his name, and we're going to do an interview on Wednesday, and I'm going to bring that to the YouTube channel Edge of the Matrix. So if you're interested, it's a very, very traumatic story, but it's the detransitioners that are going to end this madness. If the mainstream media were to feature the stories of the detransitioners, this would end tomorrow. But they're not doing it, so it's going to be people like myself and other people that are doing this, bringing the detransitioner stories to the general public like you, which is going to end this madness. Okay.
Well done. Thank you very much, Steve. Well done. Right, very quickly, we're back again. There's a change in the timetable. We're back at 1:15, and just to give you the names, so it has been just moved around. At 1:15 is David Shaler. At 2:30 is Gary Faulkner. At 3:45 is Kali and Robin Hood. And 5 to 6 is Harry Rhodes. And I've been asked to make one quick announcement. All the dog owners, if you wouldn't mind picking up the lovely things your lovely animals leave behind, that would be greatly appreciated. So back at 1:15. Yeah, only 1:15.
Just one last thing for those that aren't going. I forgot to show you this. This is a book, In My Daddy's Belly. This is what they're teaching kids, that men can get pregnant. If anybody wants to look inside this, if you've got the stomach for it, come and see me. Could be in your kid's school library. In My Daddy's Belly.